everyone, my name is Junon. I have a health science background, and I'm the author of the book Truth and Empathy, How to Find Your Soulmate. And I'll put a link to the book below. This video is about uncommon characteristics when it comes to the INFJ MBTI personality type. I hear a lot of people who identify with this personality type, but I'm wondering if they understand what it implies. So let's look at characters that only INFJs actually usually have. First of all, the INFJ has a theta brainwave dominance. So it means that this personality type is in a deep meditative state 24/7. And you might say, well, that's kind of odd. But if you look at history, the people who were truly INFJs, we're talking about Mahatma Gandhi, Jesus Christ, Buddha, Krishna. They really had a type of brain that is not common. And I hear a lot of people saying that the 1% of the population is an INFJ. I would say it's much less than that because, let's face it, if let's say we encountered even 1,000 people in our lives, it means that we came across 10 Buddhas or 10 Jesus Christs, or I think it's highly unlikely that this would actually happen. So I would say it's much less than what people say, or the statistics. The other aspect is that with this type of brain, the person breathes much slower than most people. So the INFJ, because it's a 1-to-1 ratio, like in the brainwave dominance, because it's theta, it means that they breathe 5 times a minute or less, which means that the INFJ is the least likely to have any mental health issues. So if you hear someone saying that they have depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, ADHD, the person is probably not an INFJ, because actually I see people, try, testing on yourself. Breathe even 6 times or 5 times a minute, slow light breath through the nose, and see what happens to your mental state. You will start feeling different within 3 minutes. And if, let's say, you had a panic attacks or anxiety, all of a sudden you'll see, oh my God, I feel great. Yeah, and if a person is an INFJ, that's how they breathe normally. And you know that the INFJ, their resting breath is the correct one, is that if, let's say, an INFJ, is hyperventilating, it's probably if they're breathing maybe 7 or 8 times a minute. So depending on your resting breath, and if you still feel good, it probably means that it's around your resting breathing rate. The average human being breathes 15 times a minute, which is very different from an INFJ who would breathe 5 times a minute or less. So that's something that people, I think, really need to understand. The other aspect when it comes to the INFJ, because of that brain dominance, it means that this person's brain is coherent. So if let's say you were to do EEGs, you will see that especially the prefrontal lobes, the left brain and the right brain communicate very well. So in other words, the brain works as a unit. So the INFJ, when that person looks at a situation, they have to sort of look at not only it's like satisfy their right brain, but also their left brain. Although the INFJ is officially an intuitive feeler, so it means that it comes from the heart, but it has introverted thinking as its third function. So the INFJ is always looking at the internal logic of any situation. The other aspect also, the INFJ has introverted intuition as its first function. So this personality type is interested in absolute truth. That's why if you look at history, the people who were true INFJs were the ones who created true religions. So like, Christianity and let's say if you look at Buddhism and so forth, is that yes, these people were about truths that are eternal, which has to do with the root of any true religion. So you'll see that the INFJ, if in any situation, whether it's at work, in relationships, whether in different types of relationships, they have to sort of adhere to absolute truth and also internal logic. So if you hear someone who can stay in the wrong job, in the wrong relationships, do things that make no sense, and they're fine with it, most likely they're not an INFJ, because they would have too much internal conflict about it, because they have to, in other words, satisfy both sides of their brains. The other point is that the INFJ is the most expressive of the intuitive feelers, so they come across as an extrovert, although they are pretty much an introvert. What makes someone an introvert than extrovert has to do with how they get recharged. So obviously, having the best energy of all the personality types, the INFJ is the most introvert of all the 16 personality types. But most people would mistake them for extrovert, because extroverts, if you look at the other personality types, are the ones who tend to be more expressive, who would like to mingle with others. So being expressive is often, and also having social skills, linked with being an extrovert, which is not the case for the INFJ. So if you see someone online who looks like, who has social anxiety, who who has a hard time communicating with others, and because they're INFJ, most likely they're not. The other aspect with INFJ is that because it has a well-developed left brain, it can understand math and science easily. So that's why it has introvert thinking as its third function. So if you hear someone who say, you know what, I was really bad at math and science, very difficult for me to understand, most likely they're not an INFJ. The other point also with the INFJ personality type is that because it has the best energy of all the personality types and it has a theta brain dominance, it can have a healing effect on all the other personality types. So in other words, the INFJ is truly the universal healer. And what happens when a person is doing healing, I know some people have, I think a lot of people have heard of Reiki, is that there is a physiological synchronization that happens. But obviously in the case of a healer, it's intentional. So the INFJ having a coherent brain who's naturally in a deep meditative state is able to impart that on his or her clients. So that's why the INFJ is truly the universal healer. If a person doesn't have that characteristic, most likely they're not an INFJ. The other point when it comes to the INFJ is that this personality is not afraid of conflict compared to the ENFJ. So if you look at other personality types who have extrovert feelings at their first function, these are people who are willing to, suffer in silence, not tell the whole truth to keep group harmony. But it's not the case when it comes to the INFJ because they're more interested in absolute truth and internal logic than keeping the peace. So although, yes, they have a feminine and orderly relationship style, which has to do with bonding with others, but it has to make sense and it has to be aligned with truth. So, in other words, I would say that when it comes to the INFJ personality type, I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there, and I think it's important to actually understand, based on a person's brain type, what will happen. And one last thing when it comes to the INFJ is that the INFJ, because of their resting breathing rate, obviously, in terms of mental health and physical health, but also an INFJ, because they are nose breathers, because you don't need to open your mouth if you're breathing 5 times it or less, so they will have 32 straight teeth. And I'll put some information down there in terms of the importance of nose breathing. And what happens is that if a person is a nose breather, their tongue rests on the roof of their mouths, and that shapes the upper jaw. So you'll see that a true INFJ will have space for 32 straight teeth. So if you see someone with, who had to have braces, who had to have, their wisdom teeth removed to actually fit their teeth into their jaw, most likely they're not an INFJ, because the INFJ, even when they're very stressed, will never get to a point where they're breathing more than 16 times a minute, which means that they would have to open their mouth and the tongue is not on the right position, and then they would end up with an underdeveloped jaw. So for all these reasons, I would say that the INFJ personality type is extremely rare, and certain characters I think are not well understood. So I hope that brought people more clarity about certain characters about the INFJ that is really uncommon. So let me know if you agree or disagree with the content of this video by commenting below. If you learned something, if you like this video, please click on the like button. Remember to click on the notification bell to be notified of other videos I'll be making. Subscribe to my channel, and we will talk soon.